Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily for this Wednesday, May the 13th. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, a Center Square exclusive with the Washington Department of Commerce providing us with a new complete list of the daycare provider recipients who received nearly $58 million in grant awards last month. There was a big to-do from Governor Bob Ferguson, but you may recall when that list came out, about 20 of those grant award winners were not listed at all. We've gone back and forth with the Department of Commerce and DCYF, and just today received a complete list. It is, again, a Center Square exclusive. So that's coming up in today's episode. And then more on a story we discussed in yesterday's episode with the Professional Educator Standards Board meeting for 2 days, meetings that start tomorrow, run pretty much all day on Thursday and Friday. One of the main issues of importance for those 2 days of meetings is with this board, PESB, PESB board, making a change in the Washington Administrative Code, basically allowing them to go after school district superintendents that have pushed back on some of OSPI's gender policy directives. This is in conjunction with House Bill 1296, passed by lawmakers in 2025, basically undoing what they had done the year before, the Parental Bill of Rights. There's been a lot of districts that we've reported on over the last couple of years that have pushed back and said, we're not going to comply, especially now with Trump in office and a different federal directive. They feel they've got a little bit of support on their back for resisting some of these policies. We're going to get into that today. I was given an opportunity to interview two of the PESB board staffers late in the day yesterday, so I want to share part of that conversation with you. And then finally, the income tax repeal initiative launched on Tuesday. Part of that press conference included Jesse Proudman, very active on social media, founder of Venice AI. He's a local, born and raised in Tacoma, an entrepreneur. And he took part of that press conference yesterday to say, I'm out. And I'm hearing from a lot of people that I know as well. Our businesses, our personal residences, we're out. And maybe this income tax is the final straw. I'm going to play part of that for you and also tease you to watch tomorrow's episode of Washington in Focus Daily, because I have an opportunity to visit with him in an exclusive interview tomorrow morning. So we're going to share a lot more of his thoughts on the business, the exodus of the wealthy. So let's dive in. The Washington Department of Commerce today provided the Center Square with a complete list of the daycare providers, their names, their locations, who received a combined $58.7 million in grants last month to expand, to renovate, to provide some facility upgrades, to create more childcare slots in the state of Washington. This was touted by the governor, creating more than 2,000 additional childcare spaces through the Early Learning Facilities program. Well, you may recall that up until today, when that list of more than 70 award recipients came out, there were about 20 of them that were simply listed as family home facility, with the city noted without any other identifying information. In some cases, these were facilities receiving millions of dollars, but they weren't named. Well, given what we've been reporting on for nearly 6 months now at the Center Square and other media outlets as well, some of the questionable, inexplicably large taxpayer subsidies going to daycare providers and facilities, there's a lot of questions here about why you'd put out a brand new list of recipients of taxpayer grants without saying who they are. There was a lot of pushback. It did not go over well with Senator Leonard Christian, Republican from Spokane Valley, who told me in an interview that no provider receiving taxpayer money should be unlisted.
I mean, a business is being protected from, then their information being put out there. That just makes zero sense to me. You're a business receiving money, taxpayer money. You're not some, needing to be protected person, you're filing for a business grant. Certainly that should be there. I know I tried to look into just the daycares in my area so that I can kind of, do a little personal investigation, drive around, and it's almost impossible for me to even get that, even with the staff, to figure out what's going on, who's getting money, what daycares are around our area. I just keep getting referred to a website that just has nothing on it. So it's frustrating even for me, which should be fairly easy. And it should be a quick email. Hey, what's the number of daycares in my district and where are they located? Here's a website that has nothing. Uh, yeah, this is ridiculous.
So now, in hiding some of the providers receiving these large grant awards, we had the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and the Department of Commerce citing a revised Code of Washington, so law in Washington that was result of a, I think it was a statewide initiative that was passed 10 years ago. It was that came about. Um, it was Initiative 1501, and this was approved by the voters of Washington with a bill that was intended to protect the elderly from identity fraud. And this was, you know, identity fraud and other financial crimes, scams being committed against the elderly. People said, well, yeah, we should certainly protect these people. Their names, their residences, their social security numbers shouldn't be out there for the public at large to have access to. So that was the motivation for that. So then I went back to Commerce and I said, wait, you're citing this RCW as an explanation for why the public should be denied access to who these providers are. And the initial response I was given, and I'll just read this to you so I don't mess it up. Commerce relies on the state AG's office for interpretation of such laws. The best way to proceed to get this information is to submit a public records request, blah, blah, blah. That came from a spokesperson at Commerce. But I went back to them specifically saying, I want a further explanation as to how a law that was created to protect seniors from identity theft is being applied to hide the names of daycare providers receiving large taxpayer subsidies. And the response I received then on Tuesday midday was to say they were reconsidering. Here you see what Amelia Lamb with Commerce sent me yesterday. She said, I just spoke to our public records manager who has received new guidance from the AG's office about this RCW. In response to the new guidance, we will release the full list with the site addresses. I'm expecting to have that from him later today, and I'll share it with you when I get it. Again, that was from Amelia Lamb at Commerce about midday yesterday. I again expected to have it by day's end yesterday. When I woke up this morning and checked email, anxious to see it, it wasn't there. Sent her an email, and then about 10:30 this morning, I received that complete list with all provider names and locations. And these include some home daycare providers that were previously unlisted in Yakima. There were several, again, about 20 of them that were previously unlisted are now in the full document sent to the center square. And I went back to check Governor Ferguson's initial release the day he announced these awards, the grant recipients. And at that time, we were looking at it going, wait a minute, why are these not identified? Well, when you click on the link today in the governor's initial press release, it includes the updated link to the full list of providers' names and locations. Now, full disclosure, I've not yet had time to look into these newly identified providers to see if any are receiving other potential state or federal subsidies or anything there that appears to be an unusually large subsidy. Some of the other ones that we've identified certainly have raised eyebrows. Again, I have not looked at any of these newly listed award recipients. We're going to flesh that out, though, in the days to come. Okay, now the battle over parental rights and how Washington school districts are responding is front and center for 2 days of meetings that begin tomorrow. They're being held at a Radisson Hotel in the SeaTac area. This is the Professional Educator Standards Board. These board members are appointed by Governor Bob Ferguson. And what they're charged with doing is rewriting the rules, basically. But what it means is your child's superintendent, depending on where they go to school, could end up losing their job if they are not in compliance with House Bill 1296, which was passed by lawmakers in 2025 in the legislative session. That was the bill that kind of undid the Parental Bill of Rights passed the year before. And 1296 said you can keep secrets from parents. If your child is socially transitioning at school and Bobby wants to be called Susie, we don't have to tell you. If your child is seeing a counselor at school and saying, I'm confused about my gender, I maybe want to explore the idea that I'm trapped in the wrong body, they don't have to tell parents. There have been several school districts in our state, which we've written about extensively, that have pushed back on this. And we talked about this in yesterday's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. One of those school districts is Kennewick, where the school board president, Gabe Galbraith, has been very outspoken about this. And he says, stop bullying us. The state, we should have local control. That's always been something that in the state of Washington, local school districts have been happy. They're the ones that hire the superintendent that will uphold and sort of align with the values of that school district. Things in central and eastern Washington are vastly different than they are in most of western Washington when it comes to, politics of how schools operate. But I want to share part of my conversation that I had with two of these board members with PESB. That again, this is the board that is going to be amending its rules this Friday to align with House Bill 1296. So I spoke to PESB's Director of Policy, Michael Wynn, and another one of their officials. I want to share part of that conversation with these board members that I had late in the day on Tuesday.
This basically, the statute is all the statute is saying is actually that superintendents must follow the law. It says that if they don't follow the law, it would be considered unprofessional. That's basically the definition we're putting in the statute.
Yeah. But all I'm saying is, but you're telling them they have to follow the law, but then some of these superintendents are saying, but it's in conflict with federal law.
Well, that would be up to the interpretation of the courts at that point. That's not up to us. We are basically putting on the books saying superintendents must follow the law, and if not, you could be considered unprofessional based on that. And then, but what the law is that's a different, which law they follow is not up to us to interpret.
And I think part of that is we are a state agency, so we follow state law and directives from the legislature, the RCWs. And so yeah, that battle is one that, the DOJ is fighting with the state.
So you see them basically saying federal law may conflict with state law, but we're in charge of state law. And so that's what we're charged with doing and making sure we're in compliance. And so they have to change the WAC, and it's expected that they will on Friday. Now, one other thing I want to mention in my conversation with these two gentlemen from PESB, I pressed both Wynn and the interim executive director you just saw there, Ron Jacobson, on why the board is making the change at this point. You remember this was passed in 2025. Here we are in the middle of 2026, now just sort of amending the WAC to be in compliance, especially given the fact we've got two initiatives that are going to be on the ballot in November. These are the initiatives to protect girls and keep boys out of girls' sports, trans athletes out of competing in the wrong gender category, and also to restore the Parents' Bill of Rights and go back to the original Parents' Bill of Rights before lawmakers amended it with House Bill 1296. But when I asked both of these gentlemen about the initiatives, I was told, and I'm going to read this so I don't misquote them. The first gentleman, Mr. Wynn, told me, I'm not aware of that. He was referring to the initiatives. And then he said, what are you referring to? Again, I had asked him specifically about the initiatives. And then Mr. Jacobson said, I'm not aware of those initiatives or polling around any of those, indicating he too was unaware of the high profile initiatives. I bring that up only because it seemed very odd to me that neither of these gentlemen who are on a governor appointed board that's going to be amending a WAC referring to this exact issue is not aware that voters are going to be weighing in on this in less than 6 months. I just found it a little bit curious. Now, anyone wishing to provide comments, and you can go and attend these meetings in person if you are so inclined and passionate about this issue. Anyone wishing to provide comments can go sign up Friday morning in person at 8:15. They're only taking public comments, it says on the agenda, for 15 minutes from 8:45 to 9 a.m. on Friday. You can also, though, provide written comments to the board. And Mr. Wynn with the PESB board, he told me, based on public comments and input here, the board could end up putting off ultimately a decision here on amending the Washington Administrative Code. I found that very interesting. He did share that. I would encourage you to go to the Center Square Washington page today. I put up an article, and there are links on how to provide your written comments, links as well to information and directions as to where these meetings are taking place over the next 2 days. So again, check out the Center Square Washington page for my article with direct links to all of this. And now the business and wealthy exodus that appears is happening in Washington, or certainly a lot of people talking about it. The income tax repeal initiative was in fact launched yesterday by Let's Go Washington. And part of the press conference announcing that initiative included Jesse Proudman, founder of Venice AI. He is from this area. He's very vocal on social media. He's been super critical of the income tax and other capital gains taxes and business and occupation taxes in the state of Washington. He's been featured a lot recently on the national stage. They had him on Fox News at the beginning of this month, talking about how he and others are planning to leave. He said, absolutely, this state, in his words, is hostile to business at this point.
I started my first company from my dorm room at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. That company went on to be acquired by IBM in 2015, and I followed that on with 2 additional startups here in the state. I remember being a kid in Tacoma, coming to Seattle in early 2000, and just being in awe of the startup community here. I had to do a paper in middle school about technology and startups, and came and interviewed GoToNet executives on the pier at the waterfront. And it was really that experience that motivated me to get up into the startup ecosystem. The reality that you can build and create something from nothing, it's an inspiring vision, and one that really should and can get people ready to sort of pick themselves up from their bootstraps and create the companies that have made this region great. We look at the names that we see in the news on a day-to-day basis: Boeing, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon. These are all companies that were started by some founder here in the state and have grown to provide jobs for so many people. And so as I've watched sort of the progression and the villainization of the entrepreneurs in Washington over the last number of years, and then more importantly with this specific law, it's really become frustrating and depressing to think about what this state would be like without that entrepreneurial spirit. The reality is that this law specifically targets and penalizes entrepreneurs. You think about an entrepreneur who starts a business and for many years earns below market wages. And if they are very lucky, a very small chance of success, and they get an exit, they sell their company, the state now comes to take 10% of that success. You compare that to the large corporations that are already earning sort of substantial profits in the state, who aren't going to end up paying any taxes with this illegal and unconstitutional income tax. Like it doesn't logically make sense. And it's not just entrepreneurs, it's small family businesses who also have the same challenge in front of them. because of the way the tax is structured, sort of pass-through income for LLCs and S corps ends up being paid as well. So it's really a targeted tax against a very narrow cohort of people in Washington by design. The reality, though, is that the state is not targeting just that cohort. With 300 bureaucrats being hired to go police what is estimated to be roughly 20,000 eligible taxis under the law, it's clear they're building a structure to tax ultimately everybody in the state. And Jamie Peterson has made that clear, that is his intent and that this is a starting place. And so sort of all of these things, in my mind, really have made this an unfriendly and unfortunate place to do business.
Now, again, that was Jesse Proudman in the Let's Go Washington press conference on Tuesday, announcing the initiative that hopes to repeal the income tax. I give you that teaser because I do get an opportunity to interview exclusively Mr. Proudman tomorrow morning. So in Thursday's episode of Washington in Focus Daily, I'll share a lot more about his thoughts on, the business and wealthy exodus from Washington that we're talking about on almost a daily basis now. It's impossible not to see the reports. So that is it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Wednesday, what is it? It's still just May 13th. I appreciate you tuning in. As always, hope to see you again tomorrow.